I've been following WWE or WWF for a very long time, and still 1997 remains my favourite year in the company's history. I know there's many videos out there with people talking about key moments from 1997 and what these moments meant to the overall WWF landscape, but I wanted to do things a bit differently by breaking down each month. By doing this, you'll hopefully gain a better understanding of the WWF's evolution as the year went on. So let's get started by setting the stage a little before breaking down the key moments from January 1997. What's so important to remember here is that in 1996, the WWF was pretty sanitized. WCW were absolutely killing it in the summer of 96 thanks to the introduction of the New World Order, but the WWF were kinda prodding along doing what they always do. Shawn Michaels was the WWF champion. He was putting on incredible matches that made WCW's main events look incredibly dated, but the NWO storyline was keeping viewers hooked to WCW programming, and HBK felt he was partially to blame for this. Shawn felt it was his responsibility as WWF champion to get more eyeballs on Monday Night Raw every week. Then came Survivor Series 1996, a very important pay-per-view that set the stage for 1997. At this show, HBK's rival Bret Hart made his return and he put on an insanely good match against Stone Cold Steve Austin, a match that helped elevate Steve to the next level while also kicking off one of 1997's best rivalries. And also at Survivor Series, HBK lost his WWF Championship to Psycho Sid. What's remarkable about this main event is that the fans loudly booed the babyface Shawn Michaels while cheering for the heel Psycho Sid. Not the first time such a thing happened on WWF programming, but certainly the first time it was this loud during a pay-per-view main event championship match. Survivor Series 96 felt like a real change in tone for the WWF, whether it was intentional or not. But our big takeaways here are the Bret vs Austin match and Shawn losing the belt after feeling like he had failed as the company's champion. Bret Hart would then try to beat Sid for the WWF title at the end of 96. He was unsuccessful and he blamed it on Shawn Michaels, so Bret would have to enter the Royal Rumble in order to get another shot at the championship. We learn at the beginning of the year that Shawn Michaels is going to get a rematch against Sid at the Royal Rumble. The Rumble's going to be held in Shawn's hometown of San Antonio, Texas, so the outcome feels a bit predictable. Sid makes it personal by attacking Jose Lothario's son, but nothing else really comes of this. At the Royal Rumble, Shawn Michaels defeats Sid to win the WWF Championship. Before the match though, Shawn revealed that he was dealing with the flu, but many suspect HBK was really run down due to his current lifestyle. It'd be unfair to say if this was definitely true, but Shawn did look pretty wrecked at this show. The Rumble match was very interesting. Bret Hart eliminated Steve Austin, but Stone Cold got back in the ring to eliminate Vader, The Undertaker, and the Hitman to win the Rumble match. Bret Hart's absolutely furious, and fans are starting to see a different side of Bret, one that tends to complain a lot even though he's absolutely justified in being pissed off. So annoyed is Bret that he goes to Raw the following night and he announces he's quitting the WWF. He's tired of being screwed around by Austin, Shawn Michaels, Vince McMahon and the WWF in general, so he's packing his bags and he's going home. Steve Austin comes out moments later. He calls Bret a crybaby, which does go over well with a portion of the audience. But later on, WWF President Gorilla Monsoon announces a Final Four elimination match at the next In Your House show. Because of the way Austin won the Rumble, Monsoon wants to give Vader, The Undertaker and Bret Hart another chance to headline WrestleMania. All Bret has to do is come back and say he'll be part of this unique match at the next pay-per-view. Bret agrees. Austin says this is bullshit, saying as there's no instant replay rule in the WWF, but Stone Cold has no choice but to also compete in the Final Four if he wants the main event WrestleMania. Also of note is the fact that Austin main evented this particular episode of Raw against The Undertaker, a glimpse into the future, saying his 1998's main event picture would be dominated by an Undertaker vs Austin rivalry. Another storyline that had been developing was a teased breakup between Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, leading to one of the greatest Raw matches in history taking place in March, but we'll come back to this in a moment. Things got kinda weird in February. The WWF began hosting Raw in some pretty unique locations, though their television ratings didn't improve. The first Raw of the month was held in the Toronto Skydome. The 13th of February episode was held in the small Memorial Auditorium in Lowell, Mass, while also airing on Thursday night. The following episode was held in a typical arena venue in Nashville, and then the final Raw of the month took place in the Manhattan Center. Loads going on in February that would have severe implications for the months that followed, but the big story centered around Shawn Michaels forfeiting the WWF Championship. He said he lost his smile. Bret thought Shawn was avoiding the inevitable HBK vs Hitman rematch at Mania 13, but whatever the case, Shawn was no longer champion, and that meant the final four match at In Your House would now be for the vacant WWF Championship. Bret Hart would win the match, one of the most underrated main events of the entire year in my opinion, but he would then drop the belt the following night to Psycho Sid thanks to tons of match restarts caused by Steve Austin. Loads of rumours swirling around about what exactly was supposed to happen around this time period. Sid said he was scheduled to win the WWF title at Thursday Raw Thursday, while it's also been rumoured that Steve Austin was supposed to win the final four, only he went into that match injured. It doesn't really matter though. Bret Hart won and lost the WWF title in quick succession, and he had more reason to complain about his treatment in the WWF. Two other things of note. Thursday Raw Thursday also saw blue chipper Rocky Maivia win his first singles championship when he beat Hunter Hearst Helmsley for the IC title. Fans turned on Rocky during the match, and the white meat babyface felt his real taste of fan backlash. Also, at Raw in the Manhattan Center, ECW were invited to showcase some matches, while Vince McMahon openly promoted Paul Heyman's first ever pay-per-view. ECW would swing by a few times in early 1997, something that was very, very refreshing to see, and something that added to the magic that was the WWF in 1997. The first Raw in March featured tape matches from a WWF tour in Germany. During this broadcast, fans got to see the first ever European champion get crowned when Davey Boy Smith took on Owen Hart. The match was absolutely phenomenal. It's still one of my favourite Raw matches to this very day. And the British Bulldog came out on top while showing everyone he could still go when he was motivated. Also, on this episode, it was announced that Steve Austin would face Bret Hart in a submission match at WrestleMania, while The Undertaker was going to get a shot at Sid's WWF title at the biggest show of the year. The following week, WWF Raw got completely revamped with a new look and a new name. The show was now named Raw is War. UFC legend Ken Shamrock was announced as the special referee for Bret Hart vs Steve Austin. And then, on the 17th of March 97, Bret Hart had the opportunity to win the WWF Championship inside a steel cage. If Bret could win the belt from Sid, then the Austin vs Hart submission match would be contested for the championship. So obviously, Stone Cold wanted Bret to win this match too. The Undertaker wanted his opportunity at Mania, of course, so he would come out to assist Sid while Stone Cold tried to help the Hitman. In the end, Undertaker slammed the cage door in Bret's face, allowing Sid to leave Raw with the WWF Championship, and a frustrated Bret Hart cut one of the most memorable promos of his entire career when he shoved Vince McMahon down to the mat while saying this is all bullshit. Vince credits this moment as the true genesis of the Mr. McMahon character, but what this moment also did was make Bret Hart look even more like a crybaby. Again, he was totally justified, but fans were hearing Bret complain a lot, and this, in turn, was making these same fans turn their backs on Bret. WrestleMania 13 takes place. It isn't a good pay-per-view, but Austin vs Hart becomes a legendary encounter where Bret solidifies his heel turn while fans embrace the defiant nature of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin didn't submit, he passed out and Ken Shamrock had to stop the match, but Bret attacked Stone Cold after the bell before backing down from a fight against the world's most dangerous man. The Undertaker also won the WWF Championship when he defeated Psycho Sid in a pretty dull main event in my opinion, and Rocky Maivia still struggled to win fans over when he successfully defended his IC belt against the Sultan. On the 24th of March episode of Raw, the night after WrestleMania 13, Bret Hart ripped into American WWF fans. He said he felt he lost the match against Steve Austin due to the way fans treated him at WrestleMania, and he said if American fans don't care about him anymore, then he's not going to care about them. Bret made it clear that it was only American fans he had an issue with. He still cared deeply about his supporters away from American soil. Shawn Michaels made an appearance here, telling Bret he was a mark for himself while fans are free to boo and cheer whoever they want, and Bret decided to attack Shawn after this promo. The 31st of March episode would feature Bret Hart stopping a fight between his brother Owen and brother-in-law Davey Boy Smith. The Hart family became reunited. Bret would lead this new version of the Hart Foundation. And also on this same episode, the Undertaker and Kane story arc began when Mankind lit a fireball in Taker's face. The dead man would seek revenge at the next pay-per-view, and his actions would cause Paul Bearer to tease a dark secret about the Undertaker's past. Ken Shamrock has his first match on Raw and he beats the hell out of Vernon White, one of Ken's trainees at his Lansdowne MMA school. Austin gets himself a match booked against Bret Hart at the next In Your House pay-per-view, Revenge of the Taker. And then, on the 14th of April episode of Raw, the WWF presented some tape matches from South Africa, and the show absolutely bombed. The poor content of the show, along with the poor TV rating, made Vince McMahon see red, and he made a huge decision to move WWF magazine editor Vince Russo into a creative role. McMahon was impressed with the articles Russo had written for the WWF Raw magazine in particular, so the company were going to try something completely different. At In Your House, Revenge of the Taker, The Undertaker got his revenge by throwing a fireball in Paul Bearer's face. The Phenom also retained his WWF title in this match, and the Stone Cold vs Bret Hart match ended in disqualification when the British Bulldog got involved. This match was nowhere near as good as previous pay-per-view Austin vs Hart matches, but Bret needed to take time off for knee surgery. To explain why Bret wasn't going to compete for a while, he and Steve Austin had a memorable street fight on the Raw following the pay-per-view. Austin got the better of Bret here, and the Hitman sold his knee injury pretty effectively. Also on this episode of Raw, Brian Pillman attacked Steve Austin while aligning himself with the Hart Foundation. Shawn Michaels wanted a piece of the Harts too, but Austin didn't want HBK interfering in his business. And we also saw footage of Vader going apeshit at a TV host in Q8. This would lead to the big man getting detained overseas, which the WWF, to their credit, used to their advantage. The final episode of Raw in April saw Owen Hart defeat Rocky Maivia for the IC title. Owen dedicated the win to his loving brother Bret. The Hart Foundation, consisting of Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Davey Boy Smith, Brian Pillman and Jim Neidhart, are now the WWF's biggest heels. Bret says Austin doesn't have the jam during the first Raw of May, but Bret's not so jammy himself, seeing as he's now confined to a wheelchair. Bret's scheduled to be back in action for the King of the Ring next month, and a Shawn Michaels vs Bret Hart match gets booked for the show. This match doesn't happen though due to a legitimate backstage fight between the two. Stone Cold gets himself a title shot against The Undertaker at the next In Your House show, aptly named A Cold Day in Hell. Austin was unable to win the championship due to Brian Pillman ringing the bell early. The following night on Raw, The Undertaker would begin a short feud with the Nation of Domination, seeing as Farouk was named the #1 contender. And the WWF got a little more real with this rivalry, seeing as Farouk spoke about how the company didn't give men of colour any opportunities to become main event talent. Paul Bearer showed up on this episode of Raw to tell everyone that The Undertaker had a dark secret, a secret that concerns The Undertaker's family. And at the end of this episode, we also witnessed another Shawn and Bret promo where the Hitman ran HBK down to the ground until Raw went off the air. The show was supposed to end with HBK superkicking Bret, but the Hitman went over his allotted time and Shawn felt that Bret did it on purpose. Still, the superkick did air in markets outside of America, and everyone remembers Bret falling over his wheelchair thanks to the moment getting replayed quite frequently. The 19th of May episode of Raw teased a series of upcoming sit-down interviews with Mankind conducted by Jim Ross. These interviews went a long way in humanising the Mankind character while also making the character a bit more relatable. Fans saw a different side to Mankind after these interviews, and they seriously helped Mick Foley move up the ladder in the WWF. A bit later on, Shawn got personal with Bret Hart when he said the Hitman had some sunny days, implying that Hart was sleeping with Tommy Sitch when it was really HBK who was seeing Sonny. This, along with other personal jabs the two were throwing at each other, would all lead to that aforementioned real backstage fight between Bret and Shawn. Shawn swore afterwards that he'd never work with Bret again, and he also wanted his release from the company so he could go to WCW. Vince McMahon said no. Paul Bearer continued to tease The Undertaker in regards to this dark secret. Paul said he would keep this secret to himself if Undertaker joined forces with him once again, and the following week on Raw, Undertaker decided to take Paul back as his manager. Whatever the secret was, The Undertaker did not want it being made public. Also, on the 26th of May episode of Raw, Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin became tag team champions after an excellent match against Bulldog and Owen. HBK and Stone Cold weren't friendly though, and the only thing they had in common was their dislike for the Hart Foundation. The Undertaker gets ripped apart by a returning Psycho Sid for taking Paul Bearer back. Sid wouldn't last much longer in the WWF after this brief comeback. Seeing as the Bret vs Shawn match is now off, the WWF decide to book Shawn in a match against his tag team partner, Stone Cold Steve Austin. They go into King of the Ring and have a fantastic match which ends in a double DQ. Austin now had great matches under his belt against the WWF's top workers, those being Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. So the WWF must have felt a lot of confidence in Stone Cold following this bout. Farouk failed to take the WWF title away from The Undertaker, though the dead man was getting a little fed up with Paul Bearer trying to boss him around. And new WWF babyface Mankind was unable to win the King of the Ring tournament, though he did make it to the finals. Triple H defeated Foley to become the WWF's new king, and this would begin a rivalry between the two that would continue on for the next few years on and off. Back then, a King of the Ring victory usually meant big things were in a superstar's future, and that was certainly the case for Hunter Hearst Helmsley. The next night on Raw, Hunter cut a work-shoot promo where he mentioned Vince McMahon holding him down. He even mentioned that he should have won the King of the Ring in 1996, but he was held down by politics. And I always saw this as an early version of Hunter's I Am the Game promo from 1999. He hits all the same beats in regards to his poor treatment in the WWF. Farouk blames his nation teammate Savio Vega and Crush for his loss at the King of the Ring. So these boys get sacked while Simmons promises a new, badder and blacker version of the nation. Crush and Savio would introduce their own factions named the DOA and Los Boricuas, and these factions would serve as mid-card attractions throughout the remainder of the year. On the 6th of June episode of Raw, Farouk welcomed Kama Mustafa and Ahmed Johnson into the faction, but someone else would also join up pretty soon. More on that later. Speaking of factions, the Hart Foundation were going to get a chance to fight in their own backyard. It's announced that In Your House Canadian Stampede, taking place in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, will feature the Hart family taking on 5 WWF superstars from the United States, those being the Legion of Doom, Goldust, Ken Shamrock and Steve Austin. The WWF began presenting light heavyweight matches on Raw in an effort to counter WCW's incredible cruiserweight division. Some good stars do come out of the WWF's light heavyweight division, but it paled in comparison to WCW's efforts. Brian Christopher and Takamichi Inoku were the standout performers early on. The month ended with The Undertaker's relationship with Paul Bearer completely breaking down, and so Paul revealed the WWF champion's dark secret. According to Paul, The Undertaker burned down the family funeral home with his parents and his little brother inside of it. Paul accuses the Phenom of murdering his own parents, but Paul also says that Kane, The Undertaker's little brother, survived the fire and he's still alive. Kane wants to get his hands on The Undertaker, and he's expected to make his WWF debut very soon. In Your House Canadian Stampede turns out to be the WWF's best pay-per-view of the year. The atmosphere in the building's like nothing the company's ever presented before, and the Hart Foundation are treated like absolute megastars during the 10-man tag main event. The Harts win the match, the whole America versus Canada thing's put into overdrive, and the following episode of Raw comes from Edmonton, where the fans are still going crazy for the Hart Foundation. It was such a good move to book shows in Canada just for the sake of furthering the narrative. Mankind wants to partner up with Steve Austin after Stone Cold's relationship with HBK fizzled out, but Austin doesn't care much for Mankind. What Austin didn't expect though was Mick Foley showing up as Dude Love in the middle of his tag team match against Owen and the Bulldog, and in the end, Austin and the Dudester came out on top. Mankind spoke about Dude Love in his aforementioned interview with Jim Ross. This was the first time he ever showed up in the WWF, and Dude Love would become a regular on WWF programming, a sort of alter ego that Mick Foley could tap into whenever he wanted. The July 21st episode of Raw was held in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Bret Hart was named The Undertaker's opponent at WWF SummerSlam, so the Hitman was back in the title picture. However, Bret was going to have a huge problem during this match. Shawn Michaels was announced as the special referee. Bret had previously promised that he would never wrestle on American soil again if he didn't beat The Undertaker at SummerSlam, and the WWF made Shawn agree to never wrestle in America again if he didn't call the match right down the middle. The finish of the Bret vs Undertaker match created a domino effect that altered the course of pro wrestling as we know it. Shawn accidentally hit The Undertaker with a steel chair, Bret became WWF champion, and so Shawn would turn heel and he began a rivalry with the Dead Man. If the finish of SummerSlam had been written differently, then the WWF could have looked very differently moving forward. Also at the pay-per-view, Steve Austin got a shot at Owen Hart's Intercontinental title. The match would end up affecting Austin for the remainder of his career when he suffered a serious neck injury following a piledriver. Austin was on fire during this point in his career, and the injury couldn't have happened at a worse time. Shawn Michaels turns heel on the first Raw of August, claiming that the fans were blaming him for The Undertaker losing the championship even though Shawn was backed into a corner. This heel turn caused Bret Hart a great deal of concern. The Hitman felt that Shawn was taking away all his heat, and when you think about it, Bret was absolutely right to be concerned. Ahmed Johnson got kicked out of the Nation of Domination on this episode of Raw 2, and the following week, young Rocky Maivia took Ahmed's spot within the faction. This was the absolute best thing that could have happened for Rocky, and this heel turn would allow Rock to show a lot more character. Rocky said he joined the Nation because of the negative fan reaction he'd received, and Rocky would use those negative reactions to fuel this brand new heel character that would eventually become a worldwide megastar. Shawn Michaels wrestled a main event match against Mankind, and HBK said he got himself a little insurance policy before the match. That insurance policy was ravishing Rick Rude. Hunter Hearst Helmsley in China also offered Shawn some backup during this match, and this was the first time D-Generation X were presented together on WWF television. So had Shawn not hit The Undertaker with that chair at SummerSlam, and had Shawn not turned heel, then DX never would have existed. HBK was on a collision course with The Undertaker. These two were set to wrestle each other one-on-one at the next In Your House show, Ground Zero, and the relationship between Shawn, Rude, Hunter and China strengthened after they delivered a beatdown to The Undertaker on the August 18th episode of Raw. This solidified that the group was here to stay, but they didn't have an official name as of yet. Bret Hart, meanwhile, got himself in a feud with the Patriot, so Shawn and Undertaker were headlining shows while the WWF champion felt like an afterthought. Shawn and Undertaker have a good yet chaotic match at Ground Zero. Nothing gets settled between the two, so the WWF book a rematch. This time it's going to take place inside a new steel cage structure known as Hell in a Cell, and the purpose of this new cage is to ensure no one interferes. Only one man's going to walk out of the cell, and whoever gets the win will get a shot at the WWF Championship at Survivor Series. Steve Austin begins making appearances on WWF television again, yet he's not fully 100% healed up from his injury. Austin's afraid of losing his spot on the card if he takes too much time off, so he's basically risking his long-term career in favour of trying to capture lightning in a bottle. On September 20th, the WWF travels to Birmingham, England for WWF One Night Only, a pay-per-view in conjunction with Sky Sports in the United Kingdom. Everyone thought Davey Boy Smith was going to successfully defend his European title against HBK in the main event because, well, it's in the UK and the match is also our main event. But Shawn shocks everyone by beating the Bulldog and taking his championship away. This was apparently a last minute change which Shawn politicked for. Davey was telling everyone he was going to beat HBK to send the crowd home happy, but Shawn gets the win and he gets an insane amount of heat after the bout. I've always said this and you've always disagreed, but Shawn winning this match was the right call. How he went about changing the finish wasn't great, but the amount of heat he received made up for it. Bret wrestled The Undertaker at this event too, and the match was very good. It ended when Bret got tied up in the ropes and The Undertaker got disqualified for attacking the referee. Back in the United States, Mick Foley got a great reaction when he brought back Cactus Jack. Bret Hart's now wrestling guys like Goldust, while the main focus stays on Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. Steve Austin also teases a comeback, but McMahon won't allow it due to Steve's current health issues. So McMahon takes his first ever Stone Cold Stunner and the crowd goes nuts. In Your House Bad Blood features the Hell in a Cell match, and it's an all-timer. Paul Bearer made good on his promise to bring The Undertaker's little brother to the WWF, so Kane made his debut at this show and he cost The Undertaker his match against HBK. This means Shawn Michaels is the #1 contender for the WWF belt, and this also means he's facing Bret Hart at Survivor Series. Also at Bad Blood, it's announced that Brian Pillman passed away, and in one of the most bizarre and low-down things the WWF have ever done on TV, Vince McMahon interviews Brian's widow Melanie the next night on Raw to pretty much clean the WWF's hands of any wrongdoing. Basically, the WWF were saying Brian made his own choice to take prescription medication, which, may be true, but still, interviewing Brian's widow one day after the announcement of his death was seriously messed up. Steve Austin signs a waiver that permits him to wrestle Owen Hart at Survivor Series. If Stone Cold ends up in a wheelchair, then it's not the company's fault. The fans are eager to see the Rattlesnake back inside the ring, and the match gets made official. Kane begins his path of destruction en route to a future match against The Undertaker, and now Bret Hart can refocus on reigniting his rivalry with Shawn Michaels. This time HBK has some buddies that Bret Hart can also work against, but tensions are beginning to rise backstage in regards to this upcoming Survivor Series match. Bret's agreed to join WCW because Vince wants out of his current deal. Hart's costing the company way too much money, and McMahon wants Hart to drop the WWF Championship to Shawn in Montreal, but Bret refuses to do so. This apparently stems from Shawn telling Bret he wouldn't do the same thing for the Hitman had the shoe been on the other foot. And so there's a stalemate in regards to how Survivor Series is going to end. The feud continues on TV, but information about Bret leaving the company starts making the rounds. At Survivor Series, Bret Hart agrees to a DQ finish, the idea being he'll drop the championship the next night on Raw or at another time within the next couple of weeks. Vince tells Bret, yeah, no problem, and he then proceeds to legitimately screw Bret over by calling for the bell when Shawn has Bret in the sharpshooter. The finish, known as the Montreal Screwjob, becomes one of the most talked about pieces of wrestling television in history, and it makes the vast majority of pro wrestling fans see Vince McMahon as a real bad piece of work. Vince tries to babyface it all by taking part in interviews with Jim Ross, but these interviews made things 10 times worse for McMahon. In the end, Vince would end up becoming a heel on TV due to fan backlash, and as time went on, McMahon would in fact become the biggest heel the company had to offer. Bret's now out of the company, he'll debut in WCW next month, and the WWF has to continue on while missing one of their best workers. Also at Survivor Series, Kane continued his path of destruction by defeating Mankind, and Steve Austin was able to win the Intercontinental Championship after a short match against Owen Hart. The next night on Raw, Rocky Maivia came out to challenge Austin to a future IC title match. No one had any idea how things would turn out between these two in the years that followed, but this short little Intercontinental title feud Austin and Rock had would turn out to be pretty good. The Rock steals Austin's championship belt. The two have a lot of fun as Austin tries to get the belt back, but Rock has no choice but to face Austin one-on-one at December's In Your House show. That In Your House event will be named D-Generation X. Shawn's group already has its own pay-per-view event, and HBK scheduled to defend his WWF Championship against Ken Shamrock at this very show. In the meantime, Shawn takes great delight in mocking Bret Hart. He beats up a little Bret during an episode of Raw, and he also embarrasses Jim Neidhart by allowing him to join DX for a quick moment before turning on the anvil. On the first Raw of December, DX continued to embarrass Jim Neidhart by spraying WCW on his back after giving him a beatdown. Later in the week, the WWF present In Your House and Shawn leaves the event still WWF champion. His match against Ken Shamrock ended in disqualification. Owen Hart, who hadn't been seen on WWF TV since the Montreal Screwjob, made his return at this show when he viciously attacked Shawn. Many believed this was going to be Owen's push into the WWF title picture, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Steve Austin defeated The Rock in a good IC title match at the pay-per-view, but the following night on Raw, Austin forfeited the championship so he could go after the WWF title. McMahon handed the belt to The Rock because Stone Cold didn't want to fight Rock again. Austin had nothing to prove by holding the Intercontinental belt, so Steve moved on to bigger and better things while The Rock continued to improve his character while holding the IC championship. On the 15th of December episode of Raw, The Undertaker finally stopped Kane from attacking him, and it looked like we were getting closer to a showdown between the brothers. Undertaker was telling everyone he wouldn't fight Kane, but it was inevitable at this point. Also on this episode of Raw, Vince McMahon announced that the WWF was embarking on a new creative direction, which he promised would be much more contemporary and much more in line with current television trends. Vince said WWF fans were tired of having their intelligence insulted, and therefore the WWF were going to update their product. This, I feel, was fully put into play the night after WrestleMania 14 in 1998. A special Christmas episode of Raw saw DX bearing their asses on TV, Shawn and Hunter's idea of an early Christmas present. And when Commissioner Slaughter booked the Degenerates in a match against each other, HBK and Hunter decided to have more fun with a goofy farce of a match. Hunter pinned Shawn, they laughed at the Commissioner, but joke's on you pal, because the following week we found out that Triple H suffered a legitimate injury during a house show match. The final Raw match of the year was Owen Hart versus Shawn Michaels, and Owen was unable to win the WWF Championship at the very end of 1997. Isn't it remarkable how everything that happened in 1997 felt like one big year-long story? I only noticed it when scripting out this video, but everything and everyone seemed so perfectly intertwined, even though, evidently, initial plans had to be changed quite a lot. I only really talked about the main players here too. There's so much more to dig into during 1997, including the Nation of Domination, Goldust and his character changes, Brian Pillman's work, Jeff Jarrett's return, Rob Van Dam becoming Mr. Monday Night, the rise of the New Age Outlaws, Jim Cornette shoot promos, Rick Rude appearing on Raw and Nitro in the same night, Sable becoming a huge star. There's so much more to talk about, but you've got two choices here. Either check out 1997 in its entirety through Peacock or what's available on Netflix internationally, or you can always go back and watch Reliving the War from episode 65 onwards. Anyway, I had a blast checking this all out again, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. A brilliant year for the WWF that set the stage for bigger things to come. Thanks for watching folks, and please take care.